All right. And remember, there's approximately a 30-second delay before we'll get to see who's entering the room, but we hope some people will be entering the room any second.
We hope.
I feel like I need the Jeopardy music for this.
I was actually just humming that in my head.
Yeah. There's a reason for the Jeopardy music. Yep. Somebody has made it in. Well, and the delay, as everybody knows, because I tell you every week that there's about a 30-second delay when we get started from where we are in our conversation and where you guys are. But people are coming into the room. So I will say welcome everyone to another episode of the Healthy Dog Expo podcast. I'm Dr. Lori Koger. My guest today is Hanna Mondelbaum from Evermore Pet Food. And hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi.
We are going to be talking about the hot issue of the week, the month. What would you say, Hanna?
The year, at least, because the year is very young.
Yes, the hot topic of the year, at least in the pet world, because it's been taking over social media, multiple platforms, taking over all the pet groups. People who work and own pet stores have been getting endless questions. Veterinarians are getting endless questions, and people are really worried. So, of course, what we're talking about is the current issue with both Purina and other brands, allegedly, I have to say allegedly because it's not been proven yet, making dogs sick. I think the last stats I saw on the major Facebook group were that something close to 900 dogs had been sickened and well over 200 had died. And they're making connections to commercial, primarily kibble products. There have also been some cat illnesses and deaths documented, and but we're focused on dogs here, and those seem to be the predominant numbers. Does that jive with what you've seen, Hanna?
Well, as a food that makes as a company that makes dog food, that's what we're hearing about. But as a cat owner, it's something I follow as well. The interesting thing about this and about these reports that, from a veterinary perspective, I find interesting is in the past when we've heard about recalls, the main symptoms have been renal failure. But with this, the really interesting thing is that there's a major neurological component. And I don't think, Lori, obviously you have the background here, but I don't think that that's something that we've really seen with food before in
Not that I
previous
recall.
incidents.
With the exception of the case of Everinger's, where the food was contaminated with pentobarbital, an anesthetic and a euthanasia drug, where we saw the dogs becoming comatose and dying. There have also been a plethora of vomiting and diarrhea problems. But, dogs going into seizures post eating pet food is really not a common thing at all. And of course, the reports we're getting vary greatly. The dogs may have other comorbidities. But I got one the other day. The dog ate the food and was in anaphylactic shock several hours later. How is that even possible? I don't get it.
It seems like there's something like really unknown going on here. It kind of what this is reminding me of, and this was actually the first time I was aware, of major issues in pet food, and it was before I had a dog food company. It was back in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there's plenty of people who won't remember this because they probably, have their first pet sometime in the last 17 years.
Right.
But the Menu Foods recall was the first. I know there were recalls before that, but that was really the first recall in the age of social media.
And it was big. It was multiple brands.
100 brands. I was reviewing that this morning. 100 brands were affected, and it was from getting ingredients from the same few suppliers, Menu Foods being the main one. And it was mostly wheat that had been adulterated with melamine to boost the protein levels in the wheat. So, and it was something that was very deliberately done. And there were actually 3 bad actors that were, I think, criminally charged. Actually, it was, somebody wrote about, I'm so sorry you lost those
Janet,
cats.
yeah, Janet, that was one of your turning points, I believe.
Yeah, at the time I was a dog walker, and some of my clients, one of my clients lost a cat, and another one of my clients had a dog that got sick. And at the time, again, this was before I really knew anything about fresh food. This was the first time that clients of mine started cooking for their animals, started going for better raw foods. And it's really a shame that we have to have these industry-wide failures to protect our pets, to kind of give people these come to Jesus moments,
Right.
where they're researching better options.
Yeah, they're so inspired by these sorts of events, which, I mean, it's kind of sad that we have to have something so horrible happen for people to re-examine what they're doing in terms of feeding their pets. I had a conversation with a client this morning, and he was saying how he feeds kibble and his friend feeds, I want to say farmer's dog, a fresh cooked product. And he said, her dog is sicker than mine ever was. And it's like, well, that could be for various reasons. And he asked me why he should change. And I said, not human quality ingredients and, the various things that we always say. And what if your dog could live 17 years instead of 15? They always say, but my dog is fine on this. And we're seeing that in the comments in the Saving Pets group. I've fed Purina for 20 years and never had a problem.
That reminds me of, we all have that one aunt who like smokes cigarettes and like drinks half a bottle of whiskey a day and somehow lives to be like 103, right?
Yeah.
But that's the exception that proves the rule.
Well, I think a lot of times they say it's healthy, but they've never seen true health. And so, so what? It gets ear infections a couple times a year. Or so what? It, has some vomiting or diarrhea. I don't deal with that with my dogs. And why should you deal with it with yours, except that you're feeding the equivalent of Captain Crunch every day?
I mean, the only reason I had to deal with vomiting and diarrhea was because my dog is a garbage monster, and she used to get into all kinds of stuff, like deer carcasses.
Yeah.
But back to the current situation, which may or may not turn into a major recall. It did spread very quickly through social media, through dog owners and cat owners coming together and comparing notes, which is really great that we have these platforms nowadays. And it created such a furor that Purina publicly responded. And
yes. And that was a week ago, maybe a week and a half.
Yeah, and they updated it. They published an update on the 15th, 2 days ago. I don't know exactly what changed between the first one and the second one. And I read the response, and as a manufacturer, I have a few comments on it. First of all, there was a total lack of any compassion or empathy for what pet owners might be going through. I think the first thing, I think it's important to acknowledge that people's pets are suffering, and you can acknowledge that without admitting guilt. So it just felt like such a corporate communication. And then the other thing I noticed about this is, we talk about DARVO. I don't know who's familiar with that term, but it's when people are accused of wrongdoing and they're doing something wrong. There's deflection, there's accusation, and then there's reverse. They mention that they do over 100,000 quality control checks a day on their products. So they didn't mention what those quality control checks are. And just as a manufacturer, I'm going to tell you some things that constitute as quality control checks. Weighing a bag of food is a quality control check. Running a bag of food through an x-ray, to make sure there's no metal or foreign objects in it. That's a quality control check. They could be doing that hundreds of thousands of times a day, and that's not even covering the sorts of things that would determine what's going on.
For me, quality control check is inbound ingredient testing and outbound finished product testing.
Absolutely.
It's nutritional evaluation of your formula. It's proving it's in there. It's checking your sources.
Yeah, and who, honestly, like who knows how much of that is going on because they're such an
Right.
opaque corporation.
Yeah, they're not going to tell you.
No, absolutely not. And that's one thing we as a smaller, that's the other thing that they're sort of emphasizing is they don't have any recalls happening about this and that there are no plans for a recall. Look, I would rather have a company have a recall, right?
Yeah,
A recall is when you acknowledge that there's a problem and you're getting things off the market, right?
right.
I think you don't want to have a recall. You want to do everything you can to prevent a recall. But at the end of the day, if there's even a suspicion of a problem, it should happen.
Without a
And one thing that you hear a lot, from promoters of big companies is that small companies are untrustworthy because they don't have as much quality control measures. I want to just emphasize here, small companies can't afford recalls. A recall is a very expensive proposition. So we're going to do everything in our power to prevent them. With a bigger company, it's a math problem. Oh, thank you, Jenny, or Jeannie.
well,
But
and
we do everything.
I would
I
think,
just want to read a quote about this.
go for it. Do it.
Lori, I was talking with you about this before.
Yeah.
So I remembered from the movie Fight Club, this kept going through my head before this, that there's a quote about, Ed Norton's character is an insurance adjuster, and he's talking about the process by which a recall is determined. So I'm just going to read this. If a new car built by my company leaves Chicago traveling west at 60 miles per hour, and the rear differential locks up and the car crashes and burns with everyone trapped inside, does my company initiate a recall? You take the population of vehicles in the field, that's A, and multiply it by the probable rate of failure, that's B, then multiply the result by the average cost of an out-of-court settlement, that's C. A times B times C equals X. This is what it will cost if we don't initiate a recall. If X is greater than the cost of a recall, we recall the cars and no one gets hurt. If X is less than the cost of a recall, then we don't recall.
Yeah. Yeah.
That just encapsulates how
That's
companies discuss this perfectly.
Because it's not, and Purina will say, we're all about the pets. I call BS. You're all about the money. And that is the perfect example, what you just read. They see what it would cost if we do, what it would cost if we don't. There's no thinking of, little Bobby's dog that's going to get sick.
Yeah.
Or the person who's going to spend thousands in at the vet to fix their dog that's been harmed by this.
Speaking of which, I heard reports, and I've sure you heard reports as well, where people have contacted Purina and reported that their dog gets sick, and Purina has offered to cover vet bills in exchange for signing an NDA.
Well, yes, and I'll go backwards. At first, they're like, "Oh, well, we'll give you two $10 free coupons so you can get replacement product." Or
more of the food that makes your dog sick.
Right. So it was either that, or let's say you were speaking with a company that shipped the food to you. They're like, "Well, we'll ship you another bag." Why the F would you want another bag of the food that you believe made your dog sick? Then it became, and Amazon was doing this, and I want to say Chewy as well, but please fact check me on that. They would just refund your money, no questions asked. At one point, they wanted you to ship the food back, then they didn't. And it's like, okay, you're waffling over so many answers to this problem. You don't know what's going on. Is the food bad? Do they know the food is bad? Of course, if they give you any amount of money, they're going to make you agree to never speak of it again.
And I think paying someone like that, especially with an NDA as a piece of that, just seems like some sort of tacit acknowledgement of guilt. But I want to talk a little bit about the language around recalls.
Yeah,
because one thing I have noticed just looking at the Facebook groups is that there does seem to be a confusion just around certain terms. People are using the term silent recall,
mm-hmm.
and that's really what's known as a withdrawal And if something's being withdrawn, it's never gotten to a consumer. It might be in a warehouse, it might be in a distribution center, but it's never gotten out there into the world.
Never got into a pet store.
It's never gotten to a pet store. It's never gotten shipped to a consumer. So that's what a withdrawal is. And, you're not going to hear about that if that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is a voluntary recall. And that's when the company realizes that there is or might be a problem. That's when you're going to see those letters that start with "in an abundance of caution."
Mm-hmm.
Those are,
yeah. What are we being cautious about?
Yeah. And then, God forbid we ever need to have a recall. I will not start the email "in an abundance of caution."
No.
And then there's a mandatory recall. That's when the FDA comes in and they're like, "No, really, you have a problem here." And the company isn't doing the right thing. It's up to the FDA to make that enforcement call.
Yeah.
So just want to make sure it's clear that just the terminology there is clear.
And I think there may be, and please educate me, there may be something else, because I've noticed, as we were talking about off camera, that at my supermarket, the shelf space allotted to Purina is much less. And there were very few Purina products on the shelf at the supermarket. And of course, we're talking basic Purina dog chow and Purina One. But I've also seen pictures at pet stores where, again, you have these empty shelf spaces where the Purina was. And there were also signs about how this food was on sale, that food was on sale. Do you think they're trying to sell as much product off at the pet store as possible?
It's hard to speculate exactly what is going on there. One, there could just be a shortage. Maybe there is some kind of withdrawal happening, in which case the product isn't available, or there's just a sharp drop in consumer demand. So I think that it could be one of those two, or a combination.
But if there were a drop in consumer demand, wouldn't you think the bags would just be sitting there on the shelf? The pictures look like they're just blank. It's empty shelf space, and then you have the next product.
Yeah, maybe they're not reordering. I think that when you get to that, maybe the buyer, is just conscious of what's going on. Yeah. So I would like to think that maybe in those circumstances, the person in charge of stocking the store maybe has a little bit of a conscience.
Yeah. And to be fair, this is not just a Purina issue right now. I want to say there's roughly 10 to 12 brands on the current list.
I think it's around 10 to 12 brands. There's an ever changing infographic that keeps getting updated with more and more brands. And the thing that strikes me is what a diverse group of brands they are.
Yeah. And there are also brands, a couple of them, Stella and Chewy comes to mind, that produce foods in multiple forms, whether those be kibble or freeze-dried or frozen. And we don't always know which form the consumer is talking about when they say, "My dog ate brand X and got sick." So I think if you're going to report a problem with your pet food, you need to be extremely detailed and follow the procedures. And if you go to check your pet food, the link to report is on the banner. If you go to Truth About Pet Food, Susan Thixton's blog, she has the links in there. And they really need a lot of detail so that we can get accurate information out there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Oh, and I see the comment, Alicia. It looks like it's a common sourcing issue potentially. And yes, that would be my guess. As with the menu foods, that wheat went to 100 different manufacturers, and this is one of the issues that. And now's a good time to bring it up because because it got put in the comments. And this is an issue with these larger pet food companies. They're these very bulk ingredient suppliers, and if there's an issue at that source, it's going out like all over the world to all of these different suppliers. And with smaller companies, they're not purchasing tons and tons and tons and tons of products. They're not even making the minimums for these companies. So we do tend to have smaller suppliers with more accountability. So I would say if it does turn out that these things are connected across brands, it is something at the supplier level. But that's actually another thing I hate when you read recalls. It's sort of like a blame the supplier. I will say one of the most, I would say it's the most honorable recall I've heard of. You think it's an oxymoron, but again, if the most responsible thing is to issue a recall, even if it dings the company, from a reputation standpoint, it's, I don't want to say recalls aren't bad. They shouldn't have to happen, but accountability is good, right?
Accountability and transparency.
Accountability, transparency, decisive and fast action. Back in 2011, the Honest Kitchen, actually, they had a recall because their parsley supplier had a recall. They instantly issued a recall, which is the right thing to do. And they changed their process after that, where they actually started dehydrating their food at a slightly higher temperature. So the pathogenic issue of the parsley that was recalled wouldn't have been an issue.
And they also disclosed that they are no longer doing business with that supplier.
Yes, another important facet of it.
One strike and you're out approach.
Yeah.
And they shared that. And that sort of response, I mean, I have no problem being okay if somebody says I want to use Honest Kitchen, whether we're talking about the complete food or the base mix. It's human quality. And not everybody's going to go to the trouble to DIY their own or to do a commercial that's shipped to that's not feasible for them. So use Honest Kitchen.
Yeah, and I have to say, this is a fun fact for people that don't know it. Honest Kitchen was the first company to use human grade in their marketing, and they might have even been the first human grade company, at least that got big enough. I mean, I'm sure there might have been like little mom and pop places doing it, but Honest Kitchen was the first scaled human grade company, and they fought the state of Ohio for the right to use it on their packaging. They were the first company that could make a human grade claim, and they paved the way for the rest of us. So I think we owe a little bit of a debt of gratitude.
They deserve a pat on the back for that. And, that was a legal fight. That was a lot of money to say, look, we want to put human grade on the label and we can prove it.
Yeah.
And they did.
I mean, in a way, they helped change the industry. So I think that was really huge. In terms of recalls, I want to talk about the different reasons for recalls, just so people can understand why. So first is like this weird toxin at a supply chain level, and that's the hardest thing because these are not things that are standard tests, right? You're not going to have a standardized test for melamine or whatever weird. I mean, I'm going to go with like neurotoxin here because I'm not going to say it is a neurotoxin, but something neurological is happening. So this is not something that's going to be a standard test. If there was a standard test and it was easily identifiable, they would have already made their recall. Purina was like patting themselves on the back in their response to this, to the current situation. They were patting themselves on the back for doing a vitamin D recall based on 2 reports. And of course, that's easy to test for. In fact, you should have been testing for that before something left your...
Never should have. Well,
it never should have made it out into the world. Yeah. And we as a company, we test everything, right? We get certificates of analysis for things coming in. We test finished products. And you'll see a lot of smaller companies do finished product testing. Most of them, and this is where I think we differ from that. Most companies that publish their stuff online, you'll see salmonella, you'll see listeria, and you'll see E. coli. There are a lot more things that can be problematic in food that no one tests for. And we know this because we talked to our lab. I know Midwest aren't your favorite people, Laurie.
Yeah.
They've actually gotten a lot better. And the thing we love about them is they're super responsive.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And if we have any questions, like their head of micro will just like get on the phone with us and chat for a while. But the things that we test for are, we also test for mold, which would be an indicator if there were any mycotoxins, right? So if the mold would come up positive, then we would do further testing.
Then we'd follow up, of course.
Yeah, then we'd follow up. We do something called aerobic plate count, which no one does. And that's just an indicator of whether or not there's any sort of organic activity happening there. And here's the part where it's confusing with people. That number isn't always 0. And it's fine if it's not 0 until it gets up like, closer to 100,000. That's where you have something to look at and have to dive deeper. That's also something that most people don't understand. We also test for coliforms, which for those of you who don't know, they're fecal bacteria.
Yeah, there's bacteria.
Yeah, they're generally harmless, but they're really freaking gross.
And it's a indication of the standard of cleanliness and ingredients coming into the plant.
Absolutely, but you'd be surprised. People think that just because something is organic,
Right,
that it's
right.
cleaner, and that's not always the case when we're looking at like food, like soil-borne things, especially because
Mhm.
a lot of times manure is used
Yeah.
in organic farming. The reality is produce can be pretty dirty. This is where I'm going to start sharing stories of horrible things that
Uh-oh.
have happened to us
Here we
and,
go. Here we go.
and corrective actions. One example is we did at one point have a situation where things were kind of testing like really unexpectedly high. And at
Oh,
first,
wow.
just in terms of pathogenic activity, and don't worry, this food never saw the light of day. Like, and we have a positive release you know practice where we don't food doesn't get to a position where it can be sold to the public until we have all of our test results back, and that's really huge. But we figured out that the ingredient, it wasn't the meat, it was the dandelion greens, or fresh
Mhm.
organic dandelion greens. We do at this point get a lot of our ingredients IQF, which is like where they're basically frozen on the field,
Mhm.
and those can all get tested. But like the fresh ingredients that we get, you have to. They're fresh. You have to use them, and we completely sort of changed the protocol for how they come into the kitchen, how long they get washed for. We did have to raise our temperatures a little bit on cooking, and we never had an issue again after that. But
Mhm.
that was an example of seeing a problem through our microbe testing, which was more extensive. This wouldn't have come up
Yeah.
on salmonella. It would not have come up. This problem would not have come up
Right.
if we stopped with like the three things that most people test for.
Yeah. I
Whether or
mean,
not it even would have been a problem for the dogs, who knows?
yeah.
But
Well, and dogs, the resiliency of dogs varies greatly. And
yeah.
there are dogs that can go out there and eat anything and nothing bothers them. And there's the dog who, has one different dog biscuit and is a train wreck.
And
Uh,
honestly, that latter like category is a big chunk of our customer base.
yeah.
So, I mean, people come to us because their dogs are having GI issues.
Yeah.
So, I think we act with a level of caution that I honestly can't think of a single company who does. Like, we really. Oh, and what else do we test for? We test for yeast too. So that is the full in terms of a micro standpoint, and that's where you actually see the most recalls, right? Is
Mhm.
is from these like microbiology pathogen places.
Yeah. Yeah. Beyond the excess nutrients like the vitamin D.
Yeah, and that's the other category. Oh, I want to share another like horrible micro story that
Oh,
happened to
sure.
us. And that's the thing, is we're human. Everyone's human. Mistakes can happen. It's how you prepare for this, how you address it, and how you have those contingencies in place so that when stuff goes wrong, it doesn't get out there into the public.
Or not out there in a bad way.
Yeah, it's not out there for sale.
It's
That's
hopefully, ideally.
yeah. The purpose is you want to set things up so you absolutely catch any potential issues.
Yeah.
And again, like even in the best possible world, something can go wrong. That's just anyone who is in manufacturing for more than a couple of years
Mhm.
and says like nothing goes wrong is lying. I will just put that out there.
No, I mean, you're working with machinery, you're working with humans.
You're
Stuff's
working with
gonna go
food. Yeah,
stuff's gonna go wrong. It just
stuff's
happens.
gonna go wrong. So another issue we had, and this was like a total kind of fluke thing, was at one point we had a bunch of hearts come into our kitchen that had, unbeknownst to everyone, somehow been stored incorrectly at some point in their journey. Yeah, not great. Luckily, our the person in charge of production at the kitchen caught it. They stopped production. They halted production. At this point, like something like 20,000 pounds of beef had
Oh my,
already been cooked.
that's a
So, I mean, it's a
when
lot
it
of
comes to
food. Let me
hearts,
just
it's a lot. It's a lot.
we and no one could say for sure if you know no one could say for sure exactly that none of these hearts made it in, right? There could have been one in a box of editing. So we quarantined the beef. Quarantines when you put something aside, and
Yeah.
did some testing, and everything tested fine. Like our food tested fine. We tested, I can't even tell you, an absurd amount of samples, and they all tested fine. We tested those raw hearts. They were disgusting.
Oh,
Like they were absolutely disgusting. And we talked about it. You know, we went through everything, and there was no amount of testing that would have made us feel good about this.
yeah.
Like none. Like we would have had to sample the whole like we'd have had to sample all of the food that got made. And because there was something where we couldn't prove that something was wrong, we couldn't collect insurance money on it.
Oh, wow.
We just had to eat it, like literally eat it.
What can you do?
Actually, not literally eat it, but I wouldn't want to eat it. But I mean, at the end of the day, I would rather be $20,000 out than even have a chance of making a dog sick.
Without
So
a doubt.
yeah,
Unlike A times B times C.
no A times B times C here.
None of that.
Yeah.
None of that.
So those were two times. Those were two times when there could have been a real issue on the pathogen side, right? And because we do that testing, there wasn't an issue
Mhm.
because we caught it before it left the kitchen.
Right. Now, I'm curious on your perspective here. Janet brings up a point. Why did Purina take the stance they did? Are they so confident that none of this will become public, or that we can't find with the working group that we have, we can't find the real cause?
I think
Because
that
I think of melamine as being such an out there thing to test for then, at the time of the first melamine recall. Is there some melamine 2.0 that we don't even know what it is or have an accurate test for it?
I mean, I think that I honestly think on the back end they're scrambling. I don't think that they're so confident. I think the position is, deny, deny, deny until it's undeniable. So I don't even necessarily think they're confident, because if they were confident, they wouldn't be attacking people.
True. True.
Like you were telling me someone got a cease and desist, right?
Yeah. And a cease and desist letter from the attorneys from the company. And, I mean, that has no, what would you say, formal legal repercussion, but if you ignore it, they've warned you, and now you can get in some deep doo-doo.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
So
let's face it, we are making allegations, but we don't have anything to support them yet, and we're honest about that.
there's no concrete proof.
Suspicion.
And do you know what the melamine thing?
Yeah.
That thousands, at the point when thousands of dogs had died,
Yep.
they had it. There were only 14. Like the FDA would only count 14 as confirmed cases.
Wow.
Yeah. There's I guess there's no, with the CDC, there's a centralized database for people that doesn't exist for animals.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So there could be, in any of these events, I guarantee you, there is whatever the reported number is, whatever the amount of people on Facebook on, saving pets one at a time. It's like, what? There's 70,000
Over
in that group.
70,000 people.
And there's like 70 million pet owners or something crazy like that. So it's like, this is just, the people that are talking about this are just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. But I think of how many people, I mean, there'll be 3,000 people a day asking to join that group. How activated these pet owners are to share their experiences, whether they be positive or negative. And there are people in there defending the brands that are implicated.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me, and actually this is another reason where this response almost makes me laugh how terrible it is. When the DCM thing was happening, Purina was fanning the flames of social media. They were on the other side of this. They were basically sowing panic and were gleeful about it. So when something suits their narrative,
and then Mars went out and bought Origin and Akana, the two most implicated brands.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just, if it weren't so sad because people's pets are dying, like I'd laugh at it.
It would be a John Grisham novel, and they would just murder somebody in the novel. But when you think about it, the pet food industry is billions and billions of dollars. There's a lot at stake. And companies will do whatever they can to stay profitable and such. So they will, pick whatever side they're on and fan the flames, as you said. It's just a crazy situation.
Yeah, it really is. I noticed a question from Janet that I'm just going to jump in really quickly, and then I want to move the topic to supplementation. Yes, Janet, there is a pen for Evermore. For Evermore cat
You're
food.
having a fire again.
Oh yeah, we are having a fire again. Everyone, if you hear an air raid sounding alarm, I live upstate in the country, and we have volunteer fire stations here. So whenever the firefighters need to get called in, it's like it sounds like a World War II like air raid alarm. But yes, we are planning on making cat food. We just did our final test batch before we get to releasing to the public part of it. And the reason we need to do the pet batch, this actually is a great segue to our next conversation and a topic that I don't like and like at the same time. Can you guys hear me with the sirens?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that we do is we try to get everything, from nature as much as possible. We're doing an all life stages cat food that's cooked. So as Lori, as I'm sure you know, that's a very difficult proposition.
Yes.
And with our, with what we have right now, we're going to need to supplement, and we're trying to get as creative as possible. But one of the things that we need to supplement, given the extreme sensitivity of the nutrient, is thiamine. Thiamine mononitrate is, we're looking for other forms of it, and there's some potential options, but really in a cat food, you will see thiamine mononitrate on pretty much every cat food. And that is a supplement that now exclusively comes from China. Nowhere else in the world makes it. There was a European producer that shut down like years ago. So China has an exclusive on this on thiamine. They also have pretty much an exclusive on taurine, which there used to be more production in Japan, but in the past couple of years, Chinese companies have been buying up vitamin manufacturers and amino acid manufacturers. So it creates kind of not, sorry, that's my firehouse. Somebody just asked. It's ending. It's ending. So anyway, we have to find supplements and we hate it. And they come from China and we hate it. And one thing that I've noticed is a really interesting trend is a lot of smaller, better manufacturers will claim that they're getting nothing from China, that it's all US. But then when you look at the things on the labels, you're like, no, that definitely comes from China. And what's happening is people will use a US blender, right? So, but there are for those situations, there are very strong quality control measures in place when you're making a custom blend like that. So what happens is the thing comes in, you test it, it goes into the premix, you test it. I don't like it, but that's the reality. Then you test your food to make sure the right amount of whatever you put in is in there. So that's where we have another huge recent recall was the Hills recall with vitamin D.
Sure.
And it is shocking to me that there would be a situation where vitamin D is getting put into a food. It's a fat soluble vitamin. It's something you can overdose on, right? You can very much overdose on it.
Easily.
And I would not think of a world where you wouldn't spot check that like commonly, right? Like I just don't, that is where, if there's something mysterious going on with what's happening now, not that I can understand that it's happening, but I could understand how maybe you wouldn't find some mystery substance that's not being tested for. But if you're using something like vitamin D, you should be testing that. And then you should not blame it on supplier error when it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because if it's wrong, that's on you for not checking it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other problem I have with the Hills vitamin D recall is how long they waited before they recalled. I mean, the number, I think problems started in October. They didn't recall till January. And then the second recall, there were months of lag time while this product was still on the shelf, known to be potentially dangerous.
That's awful because also that's something, again, that's easily identifiable.
Yeah. We know when we use these lot numbers of vitamin mineral premix.
Yeah, and that's like we test our minerals on every batch too. We do. Laura, you'll know what this is, an F9 panel. It
Mhm.
covers a lot of vitamins and a lot of minerals, no vitamins.
Yeah.
Vitamin testing is a whole other ball of wax, but it
Yeah.
covers a lot of minerals, and it covers the minerals that we add zinc. That's the only real supplement that we use, except for also eggshell powder.
Yeah.
That's our calcium source.
Right.
So when we test for these minerals, we're testing for not only natural variations in the minerals in the fresh ingredients that we use. When you have fresh meat, there's going to be seasonal variations. Just sometimes a year the animal's fattier, sometimes a year it gets like different soil. So it's important to track that. But also it helps us because there's calcium, because there's zinc in that standard panel. It lets us know if there was a mistake that was made, if too much or too little of something got put in. And again, we don't expect mistakes to get made. We have a great relationship with our kitchen.
Right.
But if they are made, we catch it.
Yeah. And that's the most important thing. I mean, we are all human. Machines do malfunction. Just have a monitoring process in place.
Absolutely. And here's my next nightmare story.
Uh-oh.
My next nightmare story, because I want to bring it back to our experiences.
Yeah.
So this is like everything horrible that's happened to our company edition. But a while ago, this was a long time ago, we've always monitored our copper. That's like a huge one. Even before copper was such a well-known problem, it was something we monitored. There's no upper limit for copper and AFCO. Now we're knowing about all of these copper storage issues, even in healthy raw-fed dogs, just because they're getting too much of it in their diet.
Right.
Very early on, we had been, feeding grass-fed. We were used to seeing our copper numbers in a certain range. And then on one test, it was like triple.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Triple. So we did a lot of investigation, and we found out that a supplier that we were using was lying to us and selling us commodity livers.
Yep.
And we wouldn't have caught that if we
No,
didn't
if you
test.
hadn't. But that was my experience when, we started the copper project, and I had grass-fed beef liver at 60 and 70 parts per million, and I had factory farmed liver at 1,030 parts per million. And I had some in between of other conventional. But yeah, it's such a difference. And if the supplier isn't telling you, you better be testing, because you're gonna miss it, and you're gonna cause a problem inadvertently.
Yeah, and that was another food that never saw the light of day.
Yeah, with good reason. With good reason.
Yeah, and we were a much smaller company at the point, so even though it was a lot less food, I think it hurt a lot more.
Yeah, it does. And I think of a smaller company as being closer to their product. So, you can go to the kitchen and see, and especially a fresh food, what does it look like? How's the color? How's the texture? How's it coming out of the machine and going into the container? What you can't with a huge kibble that's producing 500,000 pounds per hour, all you see are brown nuggets. So a company like yours, I don't know, it just seems like closer to it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's what we feed our pets. So we're seeing
that too.
We're seeing it every day. We get to be really like so intimately involved with our products. So it really, if there's like a color, although I have to say, my partner actually told me this the other day. He, not my business partner, my life partner, but he's like, I really have to hand it to you. For as fresh as your product is, you maintain like a remarkable level of consistency. So that actually felt really good to hear.
And having heard from consumers feeding kibble, oh, it smelled different. Oh, the color was off. Oh, there were lots of crumbles in there instead of just the nuggets. I don't think of kibble as a consistent product in many cases.
No, and actually, this is a good one for foreign objects. That's another reason that recalls happen.
Oh yeah, how many times has that happened?
All the time, and actually, so
plastic or metal in my dog food.
So We occasionally get phone calls with people freaking out at us. Like, I had this message where someone was just like swearing, just like freaking out about the food. And we're just like, what the hell is going on? And she was describing just this crazy stuff. And we call her back, and she had called the wrong company. It was some kibble. It was like for some kibble she got at Tractor Supply.
And she called you?
Yeah, so this was
Wow.
I don't know why, but like we had a rash of this for like 2 months straight, where people were calling us for these like random kibble companies.
Wow. I mean, when one hospital I worked at way back when, uh, the hospital had been there forever, had the same phone number, and Sam's Club came, and they had a different prefix, but they had our same as our phone number, and we would get calls for Sam's Club all the time because people were one digit off.
Yeah, it's. I mean, so I almost I wish we saved this message for posterity because
Yeah.
it was just the most profanity ridden thing I've like ever heard in my entire life.
Well, and I think that that speaks to the level of care people have for their pets, and especially if they think they're buying or they're paying for a premium product. And, what the hell? Why is there a piece of yellow plastic or whatever they're finding in there? Read some of Susan Thixton's blogs about where the consumer sends in pictures. Or my personal favorite, there's bugs in the food.
Yeah. Oh, we see bugs all the time. Somebody shared a I was peeping the Facebook group this morning and somebody
Yeah.
shared like Purina with like maggots in it or
Oh,
something.
yeah. And, not that is that Purina's fault, is that the transport company that, let the food get damp and had a hole in the bag so flies came in. I don't know, but the company has to stand behind their product and they have to do something and empower their employees. You see a ripped bag, you pull it to the side.
And
You
that's
don't
actually another different. You mentioned transport, so I just want to say that is another difference between human grade products and just standard pet products. Is the transport that we use also has to follow the same regulations as if like ice cream was getting shipped around.
Oh, wow,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's the same requirements in terms of like temperatures and temperature logs and handling.
Mhm.
So things going wrong in the truck, that's very with the human grade food, it's not the same
It's less
as
likely, yeah.
yeah, it's less likely. Another nightmare story about foreign objects.
Mhm.
We got an email. This actually wasn't that long ago. We got an email from a woman who was mixing two pet foods. They were both fresh foods. She was
Okay.
transitioning. And she didn't know which company this was, but she found this triangular piece of very sharp metal.
Oh,
And the only reason she found it was that she was hand feeding her dog. I was on the phone with her within 20 minutes. You know,
yes.
I was on the phone with her within 20 minutes. We checked it. And then I was on the phone with the kitchen like 5 minutes later. And we're like,
Mhm.
okay, what are the protocols here? And they explained to us everything that happens in the kitchen to prevent this type of thing happening. They're a USDA kitchen. They make human food.
Right.
Basically, before and after every batch, they check everything that's sharp in the kitchen, right?
Yep.
They inspect everything. They keep logs. And if for any reason anything doesn't check up, they like quarantine all of the food. So they're going through this whole process. I'm explaining to this, and it did look, I'm explaining to this woman how they check the knives and everything like that. She emails me back later, about half an hour later. She's like, yeah, you made me think I should check my knives. I'm sorry.
Um,
I have to go buy new
the
knives
tip of
now.
the knife?
It was the tip of her knife had broken off somehow.
Well, she must have been, like, chopping the food up, like,
Yeah, or slicing. She
frozen.
claimed she opened it with the scissors and she didn't know how it got there, but
Well, or I could see if she was slicing it and it was a little bit frozen.
yeah, something like that. But like her knife tip had like gotten into the food.
Oh my
So,
god, and she's
but
hand
she's like, but I still haven't heard from the other company. So
well, and, I've heard that and, um, seen that. You get on, like, their online chat and you get no answer. Um, yeah, you have to be responsive.
you have to be so responsive. And like I'm not gonna say like customers have never called us and had sometimes dogs get sick or sometimes we have a dog that's new to the food and doesn't
Mhm.
respond well. Like it can happen.
Yeah.
And whenever, and this is very rare, but we check in with a customer and be like, okay, here's our 10,000 questions. And half the time they're like, oh, actually, he did eat like 3 beef patties from the barbecue, things like
Yeah.
that. So I also think a good thing to remember if your dog does get sick, also rule out other options. We had one customer who both of her dogs got sick and had to go to the vet and were violently ill. And she contacted us and we were like, no, check your environment. Is there anything else? Turns out she had a yew tree in her backyard.
Oh,
These dogs almost died
yeah. Yeah.
because they ate a yew tree. So don't. I just want to caution people: don't always just assume it's the food. Like really rule out other factors in your environment because there are things that are toxic out there that can kill your dog too. So
Well, and one of my cases from this morning was a little dachshund with vomiting and diarrhea, and ate a typical kibble brand. No treats, no this, no that. And we're going in circles. Does he go out? Does he raid the trash? And it's like it's a 7-pound dachshund. Does not want to stay outside in the snow right now. But luckily, the husband texted, and he had given the dog a pig ear like a day and a half ago. And I'm picturing pig ear,
tiny dachshund.
tiny dachshund, who was known to have a touchy stomach. It's like, thank God he fessed up. So I would add to that, talk to everybody in the family who might have given the dog something, because she swore there were no chewies of any type involved.
Yeah, so I think it's important that if anything happens to your pet, it's really important to consider every factor. I'm not saying don't report stuff. Definitely report stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But it's sometimes you could be missing something really important if you leap to it's just the food. So I just want to put that out there
Yes,
too.
completely. And Alicia says that they had to use a metal detector at the grocery store to sell beef to the grocery store. So this is, I'm assuming, for the human side.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely all kinds of ways that that we can
monitor.
that, and that's, I mean, again, I think it comes down to being diligent, to prevent thinking about everything that can go wrong.
Yes.
And planning for it.
Yeah. And obviously, if you're using a commercial kitchen or you're maintaining your own equipment, everything's inspected frequently, maintained as it should be, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't know if that happens. I'm thinking of the scale of these plants that make kibble that run 24 hours a day. Does that happen?
I mean, I'm sure there's inspection, but if you have like hundreds of thousands of pounds coming out of something in an hour, like, something could go. You'd have to be inspecting stuff every 10 minutes, considering the volume.
Yeah, I mean, there comes a practicality.
Yeah,
that is impossible because of the scale.
Yeah, and I think that that's really what it comes down to. It's about looking at the scale of what it is, and just it's one thing to buy an iPhone, right? That they make. I don't even know how many iPhones they make, but that's not going to kill you. I mean, people have different opinions about Bluetooth and 5G, but that aside, maybe it wasn't the best example. But there's a difference between that being done at a massive scale and what you're feeding your pets.
Yeah, what is going to sustain their body biologically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you get the faulty iPhone, you go to the Apple store or wherever you bought it and send it back.
And you get it back, and it's
worst
not.
Worst it is inconvenient.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between being inconvenient and having a pet die. I mean, it is truly awful. I mean, we've been getting a flood of inquiries since this has happened, and I mean, while I'm grateful that people are coming to our company and finding us, it's horrible that it has to be happening under these circumstances.
Yeah. Well, and I think the perfect storm of this and last year's Super Bowl commercial by Just Food for Dogs, I mean, they kind of opened a door to sharing fresh food with people who might not, have ever thought of it.
Yeah.
And in a sense, this is opening that door too, because, the person who's a Purina Pro Plan fan or some of the other brands that are implicated is not necessarily going to even think of fresh food options. But now they are.
Yeah.
I get questions every day now.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a changing world, and I think that there is a real shift in consumer consciousness. And I mean, not just about, fresh, but also about ingredient quality, about animal welfare, which is my favorite thing to talk about.
Yep.
So yeah, it's really tragic that this is what is going on
Yeah.
right now.
Can you by chance speak to Janet's question?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. What's your
Janet
question?
being one of my Healthy Dog Expo team members. So don't forget, guys, you can come meet Hanna in person, pick her brain at the expo this coming April in Albany, and all of our other experts and VIP people, all sorts of cool things. But
Janet hit the nail on the head. So yeah, under the law, pets are seen as property, right? If your pet were to die tomorrow, you could only sue for the monetary value of that pet and the monetary value that you put into treating that pet. I think that's changing. That's starting to change around the world.
yeah, in some places it is.
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that pets have more and more standing in terms of being able to be treated as more equal under the law.
Mm-hmm.
That is definitely an area of the law that's changing. But it all does come down. It comes back down to that equation that we talked about in the beginning. The value of a lawsuit over a pet is going to be a lot lower than the potential payout where if it was a human who ate the food and and got sick and passed away.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because in the US we're really, really, really litigious. And a lot of our safety regulations that we have and even a lot of our laws come out of lawsuits. Right. So it's almost like you have to wait for something to go wrong, horribly wrong, for anything to be done about it.
Yeah.
Where
bad happened versus being proactive.
Exactly.
You will never regret being proactive, guys.
And that's the same thing. I mean, in the EU, they tend to be a little bit more proactive than reactive because they don't base everything they do on suing each other.
Right. Yeah, the Europe is different.
Yeah.
Europe is different. And I think of, like, I'll hear an announcement on the radio that, like, our local supermarket bakery is recalling, coffee cakes they made because the ingredient list isn't right, or there might be sugar in them and they were declared sugar free. And I'm thinking, well, I guess that for a diabetic, that's a great cause of concern. But for the average person, does it matter?
Well, misbranding is a major, like that's a major violation just in terms of, but it is kind of funny that's the thing. Oh, somebody's asking, there is a list of foods that should be avoided that's circulating in the Saving One Pets at a Time Facebook group. I've also seen it on Instagram. I think on Judy Morgan's page.
Yeah, it's all over.
Yeah, but if you want to see the list right now, the best place to see it is on the Saving Pets. Is it Saving Pets One at a Time or
Saving Pets One at a Time? But if you type in Saving Pets, you should get there.
Yeah, it'll come up right away. So that's where they have the most current information of what is
going. And I would point out there's going to be brands. There might be some specific formulas. And there've been a lot of people yelling we're not giving specific enough information. We can't give what we don't have. And we can't take the risk of putting, it's Acme pet food, chicken and rice out there. If we don't have evidence to prove that, then we're legally liable for slandering that company. And don't think for a minute, as we talked about the cease and desist that were out, don't think for a minute that these pet food companies won't come after influencers who make false statements about them.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's defamation and libel are the two. Yeah. I always forget the difference between them.
Defamation is to make disparaging comments about. I think libel is written, slander is spoken.
Okay, so it could really be both with TikTok.
Or all three. But in any case, you don't go after someone's brand without proof.
Yeah. And if you do, there will be consequences if they have enough money to lawyer up.
And who needs the aggravation, even if it's just aggravation? It's just not worth it. So, take the list as possible foods to avoid.
Or just these are what people have reported. I think that
Yeah,
that would be the best way to phrase it for
that's
anyone posting it, is that
and then and to stay tuned that, it will get figured out. Um, Allegedly, FDA is investing. Maybe they are investing.
maybe they are secret. Well, there
That
is like a lot of speculation about who ends up on which committees and how they're tied to who and lobbying,
but at some point the truth will come out, and at the end of the day, you got to do what you're comfortable with for your dog. And if you're risk aversive, you're going to be looking at Hanna's food. You're going to be looking at similar foods, whether they be raw or cooked or freeze dried. If you're the person who's fed, an accused brand for 20 years, you may elect to do that. Okay. Just monitor your dog, get veterinary care if things seem not to be going right, and keep on track of the information. And yes, Janet, Susan did do an interview yesterday. I talked to her. The biggest challenge she faced in doing that TV interview was the fact that it was pouring rain and she had to maintain her hair while getting into the station from her car. I
oh,
could
okay. I was gonna say, did they do it outside?
no,
Oh,
no.
okay.
But where she had to park, and I could hear the rain hitting her windshield. And she's like, I got to go. I got to find my umbrella. I got to do something.
And she has great hair.
Yes, but it sounded like a total downpour. Total downpour.
I'd love to see the link to that interview.
I'm sure it will. And she told me what station it was. I want to say it might be an ABC affiliate. I'm not 100% sure, but it'll be searchable, I'm sure. And of course, we had the New York Times article.
Yeah, which I'm glad the New York Times put the Facebook group in there.
Yeah, because let's face it, TikTok is not where you go to get your information. And the Purina thing, even in their letter to vets, where they asked for our support as their loyal fans of many years. I thought, well, you don't know me.
They're barking up the wrong tree.
They actually sent a piece out to veterinarians denying that there was any problem with the food, as was alleged on TikTok, and that they would appreciate us sharing this with pet owners and, defending them, basically. Like, well, some vets may choose to do that. This vet does not. Yeah. And the bottom line, for me, human quality.
Yeah.
That's it.
It should be, it's as I like to say, it should be the bare minimum.
It should be the bare minimum. And it's such a simple thing when you say, if you can't eat it, why would you feed it to your dog? Anybody can understand that, but it is what it is.
Well, I think we're all going to be watching this one really closely.
We're all going to be watching this very closely. And my prediction is there's going to be some sort of recall or withdrawal.
Yeah.
I think it's inevitable, even if it's just while they try to figure out what's
going on. Like I said, I'm speculating that there's probably a withdrawal happening and we just don't know about it because again, it hasn't gotten to anyone.
They don't have to share that.
Yeah.
Correct. And I think if we see that stores are out of stock on certain products, large scale, if all the Purina Pro Plan space is empty, I think we can assume a withdrawal was done.
Yeah. Believe me, that denial tells me that they're really like sweating it.
But what the heck is it? What is the cause?
Yeah, like I said, the seizures part is really, for me, what makes it.
Well, there was a test early on that showed higher levels of heavy metals, but I'm not aware of anybody being able to reproduce those results. And I believe that was tested at a university lab, very reputable, good testing, and it was significantly elevated. And certain heavy metals will cause seizures. But
but I feel like that would be really easy for them to figure out.
Oh, that would be simple.
Yeah, so I think whatever it is, there's no easy explanation, because if it were easy, they would do a recall, would be my guess.
Yeah. And I mean, who I don't know who thought to test for melamine, but I congratulate them because
Yeah.
that was just way out of anybody's radar.
And what I was reading, and I'm realizing it's like after 3 already,
Okay,
but what I read, it wasn't the
we have more
melamine,
people in the room now than we did
there's
earlier.
that's really funny. What I was reading, it wasn't the melamine itself, it was like
The
the
combination,
yeah, the combination of that, and the other chemical started with
cyanuric acid,
yeah.
but the interactions. But when I think of melamine, I grew up when we had melamine ware, which was the kind of semi-translucent, like plastic plates and picnic gear. And that was made of melamine. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, something I would take on a picnic because I couldn't break it. That's in pet food to beef the nitrogen up. It was just crazy to think
yeah,
about.
the thing that anyone would think to put that there. I guess someone was getting creative with their chemistry.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what they needed to sell their raw material at a higher profit margin because it looked like it had a better protein
Yes.
level.
I mean, they do, food fraud is a thing in the human supply chain too. It happens all the time.
What kind of food fraud occurs on the human side?
The biggest one is actually organic. That's
Okay.
where you see like the biggest one. There was some, I mean, we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars of like
Oh,
soy or corn that's like marketed as organic, but it's really
and
not.
it's not.
Yeah. Or like you have things, on a smaller scale with like cuts of meat that are like end pieces that are glued together.
Oh, meat glue.
Yeah.
Guys,
Like,
if you want to be entertained, go on YouTube and ask about meat glue. And there's a chef's video there who takes little chunks of meat and like assembles it into a fillet
yeah.
and puts
It's
it on the restaurant menu for
and it
30.
looks good.
It looks good. And I'm sure it could taste good.
And
But
there's
in
fraud with
the
honey, there's fraud with olive oil, but none of this is anything that's going to kill anyone.
right. But it is still fraud, as you
But it's
point
still fraud. And I think
out.
it's rampant. It's not limited to China. The China question came up earlier, how things from China are bad because that's where the melamine wheat came
Right.
from. And,
Right.
I take real mushrooms.
Yep.
Like, they're an amazing mushroom supplier. And they're from China. Those mushrooms come from China.
Yeah.
So
There are there are good people in China who
there are
care.
good people in China too. And this is actually another anecdote, and sort of related to the melamine thing. So for as soon as the melamine recall happened, it was actually the same. It was wagon trains happened too, the chicken
Oh, right,
strips,
right. The chicken jerky was right after.
and those were two things that like killed a lot of animals in very short succession of time. So China became, and for good reason, their regulatory framework is much more lax than ours, but suddenly everything from China was bad.
Yeah.
And, us included, we all put nothing from China on our marketing. Susan Thixton asks about China, on her ingredient
Mhm.
pledge, and
Sure.
when you're doing your paperwork for her list. So China became like this poisonous word. Sometime during the pandemic, we had a customer reach out to us. She was Chinese American,
Mhm.
and she was really upset about how our website called out things, nothing from China.
Mhm.
How, and she wrote me this email. I was like, you know what? You're right. We're just going to say where our stuff does come from. We're
Yeah,
not going to say where it doesn't come from. And honestly, there are some things from China that are good. So,
absolutely.
that was just, I think that, and it also limits it. Okay, just because nothing's from China doesn't mean that nothing's contaminated, right?
Right, right.
You could get horrible ingredients from anywhere.
That's true, and you can handle them inappropriately and poorly formulate them. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Adana put up an interesting comment. Um, she just, I apologize if you guys are getting ads because Facebook is putting ads on everything. But now advertising Purina for 33% off.
yeah, they're hurting. Like this is hurting them.
This is without a doubt. And that's why I say, use caution with our words because this is costing them money.
Yeah, it's definitely costing them money. I love when I put videos on Facebook or YouTube for my company, there'll always be ads for other companies that come up in the bottom. It drives me crazy.
Oh, I'm going to go back to Facebook and I'll have, a list of buy this pet food, buy that pet food.
And they're all going to be things on the list of things that we're saying not to feed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, time will tell on this one. How long do you think it's going to take for us to get an answer?
Months.
Months,
I
easily.
think it's going to take months.
So, yeah, weigh the possible consequences of feeding a potentially contaminated food for months, and then decide if you're comfortable with that for your dog.
Yeah, I just don't even think they know what to look for.
I don't either. I don't think they know what to look for. And the people who are most likely to know are the brands that are making this, or the buyers
Or the
of
suppliers.
or the suppliers.
They're not going to cop to it.
No, they're not going to tell.
So,
But
yeah,
somewhere there's a whistleblower out there who will say, I saw this, or why don't you check for that?
well, I hope it comes sooner rather than later.
I hope so too, because even if your dog just has some diarrhea and you go in and you spend money on an office call and some meds, you've still been harmed and your dog's been harmed. And that's unacceptable.
Yeah, we take, at Evermore, we take our responsibility for feeding people's animals so seriously. Like there's not a day when we don't wake up and think about how we're feeding your family. And when we read about stuff like this, it's just it angers us because other people aren't taking this so seriously. And anytime there is, I admitted some of the things that went wrong over the years. This stuff keeps us up at night. Like we don't.
Yeah.
When there's an issue or potential issue, like we get some gray hairs. So
you do, and that's, and there are so many companies, and as like you've been invited to the expo since I knew about you, and those are the type of people that I bring on board there. And other companies are asking, and it's like, sorry, no. If you're not the kind of person who stays up at night trying to fix something that might have gone wrong or trying to make it better, you're not the people my audience wants to deal with and work with. It should.
I hope I get to meet everyone in Expo.
Yeah, it should keep you up at night.
Yeah, it really does. I'm seeing so many people in the comments. I hope I get to meet all of you at the expo.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you'll get to meet everybody. We have some. Oh, I have Adored Beast coming. Julianne Lee will be there, and a couple new companies. A lot of the old Cocoa Therapies coming. Melissa from Four Legger will be there. Zach and Jen from Viva Raw, the folks from Joe. Loads of awesome people. I'm really excited about Rita Hogan, the canine herbalist, who's doing a lecture and a VIP workshop where people will get to put their hands in the herbs and mix them and cut them and do all the things that Rita does. And I think I told you, Dr. Royal, Dr. Recker, and Dr. Conway, who's on her way to being a boarded veterinary nutritionist, are doing an animal diet formulator workshop for the VIPs, where they're going to literally look over your shoulder as you're working in the software and coach you through it. And that's going to help people understand how people like you put these diets together. And, where's the protein? Where's this nutrient? Where's the thiamine coming from?
And you'll get to see how hard it is if you want everything to come from food.
And yes. And bottom line, see how hard it is to do what you guys do. And then, great, I can do it in my kitchen on this scale. You're doing it on that scale. And keeping it safe and available for all your people.
Yeah. And when I said do it hard, I didn't mean to dissuade it, because I don't think home cooking is hard. I'm talking about like balancing everything perfectly.
Well, when
I
say home cooking, I'm talking about delivering a nutritionally complete meal.
Yeah, the creating a nutritionally complete diet where you're really working with whole foods, not easy.
Yeah, but it can be done, and you don't have to use a bunch of synthetic vitamin mineral premixes to do this.
Yeah, and I think that, and that's some of those premixes, they'll sell the same like premix in a can to like
Yeah.
so many different companies. So I think that
So,
that's also an issue.
or my personal favorite, Balance It, which is where nutritionists send pet owners, pick an ingredient, pick a meat, pick a vegetable, pick a this, and we'll give you the vitamins and minerals to balance it. And it's always the same combination. It's like it's not tailored to what you feed. So if you want to feed meatballs and pasta, you're going to get the same vitamin mineral premix as if you do chicken, broccoli, carrots, whatever. It's
They're
crazy.
just covering all the bases with it and making
They're
you feel like
covering
you're
all the bases.
cooking. All right, Lori. I'm realizing it's 20 after, and I actually have
And we
to.
kept these people way too long. So
Yeah, you guys, thank you for hanging in there.
yes, thank you. And feel free to share this off of YouTube or either of the Facebook pages. It's available for anybody to watch at any time. Go to thehealthydogexpo.com for information on the event, and we hope to see you there. Take care.